Back in the 70s, Thelma Evans was a teenage starlet. Guys on the show weren't the only ones who wanted to be with her, as that would spill over into her real life as well. She was constantly featured on magazine covers and did plenty of photo shoots. Thelma was smart, intelligent, beautiful, and was very witty. She was the entire package. Bernadette Stanis was the actress behind the character, and she took many things from her personal life and incorporated them into Thelma, making the two more similar than not. When Thelma went back and forth with JJ and Michael, she could always hold her own. She followed in the footsteps of John Amos and Esther Rolle, who set a good example. Good Times was the first sitcom that portrayed a black family, and Bernadette Stanis was a key figure in its success, which is why Bernadette Stanis will always remain unforgotten. Bernadette Stanis was born in Brooklyn, New York, and would go on to Erasmus High School and later Juilliard. Stanis originally studied dance and auditioned for a spot in Juilliard's dance program, but she didn't make it because they wanted ballerinas. She went back and auditioned for acting and was accepted. As a teenager, Stanis entered the Miss Black America pageant, and it was all thanks to her mother. I wanted to be in beauty pageants, but Miss Black America was only for older girls. They didn't have anything for teenagers, and my mom told me they should have something for teenagers. She went to the office of Hal Jackson and said, "There are a lot of young black girls who are trying to make it. They are beautiful and they have things to offer, and we should encourage them and have a Miss Black Teen America." And the very next year, he had it. Stanis eventually became Miss Brooklyn and finished runner-up in the Miss New York State contest. And as many of us know, that was just the beginning, as Stanis' acting ability would come to use and change the course of her life. In the early 70s, CBS and a few producers began to quietly put together plans to produce a show on the everyday black family. The show would be groundbreaking, as it is credited to being America's first black two-parent family sitcom. And this is where Bernadette would engrave her name in history, as she would be selected to join the cast. In an interview with Get TV, Stanis told the media outlet how she got the role of Thelma while she was still in school. "I was in a beauty pageant and a manager came over to my mother and said, 'There's a television show and your daughter looks like she could fit the role.' So I went to the audition and Norman Lear was sitting here. I looked at the script and said, 'Mr. Lear, is it okay if I improvise? I don't talk like this.' So I went up there with Jimmy Walker and started improvising." Stanis thinks Lear and the producers liked her attitude about the role, which is why they let her improvise. Stanis' mother told her that she got the part, and she says after this, her life changed forever. My lines weren't very much, like, "Hi mom, hi dad, shut up JJ." So I went to Esther Rolle and I said, "I feel like I can do more on the show. I'm really getting bored." So we got to the reading for the next show. We're reading the script and she says, "My son JJ has a lot to say. My son Michael has a lot to say. I want my daughter to have a voice as well." In an interview with Sun Sentinel, Stanis said there was a lot of herself in that character. Like Thelma, Stanis was also raised in the projects and she wanted to be a good girl until she was married. "I wanted to do everything the right way. I was very close to my mother, and all of that was in the character. Thelma was feisty too, like me. Stanis felt an obligation as a black teenager on television. Her responsibilities grew even larger when John Amos was fired from the show after its third season, and again when Esther Rolle left after season 4. I looked at it like, hold the show together. Do your part because Esther and John would want us to do that. Esther had to make her statement. She had to do what she had to do for whatever reason. I wasn't going to let the show down by any means." Despite the firing of John Amos, Stanis defends his passion and says that she's still close with her Good Times co-workers. Good Times was on the air for 5 years, from 1974 to 1979, and was a popular show up until the end. Stanis calls herself the first black female teenager on television. She was inspiration for young black women all over. Thelma was smart, beautiful, and always had the best comebacks for her brother JJ. Like Bernadette, Thelma was interested in acting and dancing. The character of Thelma often shared characteristics from her real-life counterpart. While on Good Times, Stanis received a lot of attention, especially from young men that watched the series. It was hard to find a guy who didn't have a crush on Thelma. I didn't even know I was a sex symbol. As I started touring everywhere, people started telling me that. Back then, it wasn't social media. We couldn't connect with our fans. Like Thelma, Bernadette also attracted men. In 1974, when Stannis was just 20 years old, she married her high school sweetheart, Thomas Fauntleroy. The marriage lasted about 4 years, and the two divorced in 1978, before the series ended. In an interview with Jet magazine that was released in July 1978, Stannis explained their careers were going separate, and the two decided to be apart. In 1979, Stannis would get married again, this time to Darnell Johnson, owner of a nightclub in Brooklyn, the same year Good Times ended. It's unclear when Stannis and Johnson got divorced, but Stannis would move on and get married to Terrence Red sometime in the early 80s. The two share a daughter, Dior Ravel. Through research, it's also undetermined when Stannis and Red were married. However, an August 1982 edition of Jet magazine shows Stannis holding her 4-month-old daughter. Stannis and Red would ultimately divorce, and not long later, Stannis would end up marrying her fourth husband, Kevin Fontana, who she's still currently married to today. The two would wed sometime in the early 80s and go on to have a daughter. After Good Times ended, Stannis scored guest roles in The Love Boat, What's Happening Now, and The Cosby Show. Her time on The Cosby Show would ultimately lead her into learning more about work behind the lens. In an interview in 1992, Stannis would share that she had been working directly with Cosby for 8 months to learn about directing. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it appears Stannis would mostly focus on being a wife and mother, as she wouldn't take on any other main roles in television after Good Times. However, from time to time, she has also made time for acting. In 1997, she reprised her role as Thelma Evans for the first time in an episode of The Wayans Brothers. She has authored books in between acting gigs like Situations One-on-One, Relationships, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. In the book, Stannis goes through 101 relationship stories, gives advice, and proposes several possible solutions. Some stories are from Stannis' own personal life, and other stories are from friends of Stannis. Bernadette has also written a book on how to properly set money aside and plan for your future in Situations One-on-One Finances. Stannis also has a love of poetry, which inspired her to release a collection of poems dedicated to all of the men who have supported her throughout her career. The book was called For Men Only. The book was so popular, both men and women ended up enjoying it. Stannis also had her share of unfortunate family circumstances, however. In an interview, Stannis told the story of her mother watching an episode of Good Times, and her mother said Thelma was a pretty young lady. She didn't recognize Bernadette on TV. It hit me so hard that my mother didn't know that was really me, and it was her that put me on that show, and she gave me the face of Thelma. So I said right then and there, I'm going to use the same face to put on Alzheimer's and fight with that. I'm going to fight and hopefully educate and make aware of what it is and what this thing has going on, the characteristics of it, and hopefully we can find an answer to slow it down and stop it eventually. As a result, Stannis wrote and released The Last Night, A Caregiver's Journey, in which she chronicles her experience as her mother's caregiver when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Stannis had taken her mother to book signings of her previous releases and decided that she wanted to write a book to tell her mother's story. Unfortunately, her mother would pass in October 2011 before the book was completed. For some time, Stannis struggled to write the book without her mother, but eventually persevered. In remembrance of her mother, Stannis would become an advocate for Alzheimer's disease and travels all over giving speeches to inform the public about the disease. Stannis has created the Remembering the Good Times Foundation in order to raise awareness and educate families on Alzheimer's patients. As far as acting, Stannis has made other notable appearances as she portrayed herself in an episode of Girlfriends and has acted in 2 episodes of Black Jesus, among several other productions. As for Stannis' daughter, model Dior has made her a grandmother, while Brittany is a graduate of Hampton University in 2017. Not following in the footsteps of her mother, but instead specializing in the medical field. Stannis hasn't had a role as significant since the ending of Good Times, but has still picked up steady work to keep busy. Whether it's a television show, film, authoring her own books, or being an advocate for Alzheimer's disease, Stannis has demonstrated a skill set that's full of many talents. Her role as Thelma puts smiles on audiences' faces from week to week, which is why Bernadette Stannis will always remain unforgotten.
Are you a comedy fan like us? Head over to the Comedy Hype shop for comedy collectibles and more. Go to comedyhype.com/shop and follow Comedy Hype Shop on Instagram.